The deep, resonant hum of the C-130's engines was a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. For 40 years, it had been the soundtrack to my life, a constant, vibrating reminder of duty, honor, and the vast distances that separated me from the life I'd left behind. But this flight, soaring high above the endless blue of the Pacific Ocean, was different. This was the final journey, my last mission. Below me, the island of Okinawa, my last post, was shrinking into a green jewel swallowed by the sea. At 62, after a career that had taken me from the deserts of Iraq to the mountains of Afghanistan, Colonel Brenda Walsh of the United States Marine Corps was, without fanfare or ceremony, finally retired. My retirement was a secret I'd guarded closely. I wanted to feel the transition myself, quietly, before the world imposed its own version of it upon me. Most of all, I wanted to see the look on my son's face. My Michael. I pictured it vividly, the initial confusion, the dawning recognition, and then that wide, brilliant smile that could light up a room. No grand announcements, no welcome home parties. Just a mom showing up on the doorstep of her only child, finally ready to trade her combat boots for a pair of garden gloves. The 16-hour flight to Austin was a slow crawl through time and memory. I found myself thinking of my late husband, John, another Marine lost to an IED outside Fallujah 15 years ago. He would have gotten a real kick out of this, picturing me trying to adjust to civilian life. "You'll probably try to command the squirrels in the backyard, Bren," he would have joked. His absence was a constant, dull ache, but the pride I felt for our son was a brilliant, warming light. I'd raised Michael on my own, through a series of base houses and hurried phone calls from the other side of the world. I'd missed school plays and soccer games. I'd read him bedtime stories over a crackling satellite connection, my voice competing with the distant sounds of a war zone. The guilt of those absences was a heavy weight, a debt I felt I could now, finally, begin to repay. I thought of his wife, Tiffany. I'd only met her on a handful of video calls, a perfectly polished woman with dazzling white teeth and a laugh that never quite seemed to reach her eyes. Michael adored her, and that was enough for me. He deserved happiness. He'd had enough instability and lost for one lifetime. I imagined them in their little blue house, the one I'd helped him put a down payment on. I pictured Sunday barbecues, future grandkids running through the sprinklers, the simple, beautiful tapestry of a normal life that I was at last free to weave myself into. As the plane finally began its descent, the sprawling lights of Austin twinkling below like a field of fallen stars, a profound sense of peace settled over me. A new chapter was beginning. I was coming home. I had absolutely no idea I was flying straight into the heart of a war zone far more brutal than any I had ever known. The Texas air hit me like a warm, wet blanket the moment I stepped out of the airport. It was a familiar embrace, a welcome home from the state where Michael had chosen to build his life. The taxi ride was a blur of highways and oak trees, my mind buzzing with anticipation. I leaned forward, giving the driver the address in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in South Austin, my heart thumping a happy, expectant rhythm against my ribs. I could almost taste the coffee I'd share with Michael, could almost feel his strong arms wrapped around me in a hug. But as the taxi slowed and pulled up to the curb, the happy rhythm in my chest faltered and died. I stared out the window, a cold, sick feeling creeping into my stomach. This couldn't be the right house. It just couldn't. The charming little blue house from my memories was gone, replaced by a portrait of neglect. The lawn was a chaotic jungle of knee-high weeds and thorny vines, choking out the rose bushes I'd sent him for his birthday. The stone pathway was almost completely obscured. The mailbox, which he had so proudly installed, was bent at an angle, its door hanging open, crammed with a thick wad of damp, yellowing mail that was spilling onto the ground. Every single curtain was drawn, giving the house a blind, sealed-off look. And the cheerful blue paint was peeling away from the siding in long, curling strips like sunburned skin, exposing the dark, weathered wood beneath.
It looked less like a home and more like a place that had been surrendered to decay. "This is it, ma'am," the driver said, glancing back at me. My voice was tight. "Are you sure?" He pointed to the faded numbers on the curb. It was the right address. I paid the fare in a daze, my mind refusing to connect this scene of abandonment with my meticulous, organized son. As I hauled my duffel bag onto the cracked sidewalk, a voice, thin and hesitant, called out from across the street. "Excuse me, can I help you with something?" I turned to see an elderly woman, her face a road map of worried wrinkles, standing in the middle of a perfectly manicured garden. It was Carol Peterson, Michael's neighbor. I recognized her from his Christmas cards. "Carol?" I said, my voice hoarse. "It's me, Brenda Walsh, Michael's mom." Her eyes widened and the color drained from her face. The plastic watering can she was holding dropped from her hand, hitting the pavement with a hollow clatter. "Oh, dear Lord," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Brenda! Oh, you poor, dear woman! You don't know!" The cold dread in my gut twisted into a knot of pure ice. "Know what, Carol?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. "What's going on? Where is my son?" She wrung her hands, her gaze flicking nervously from my face to the derelict house and back again. "The ambulance," she stammered, the words tumbling out. "It came for him. In the middle of the night. Sirens and everything. It was awful. That was 2 weeks ago." 2 weeks. The words echoed in the humid air. "Where did they take him?" "St. David's Medical Center," she said, her voice dropping to a horrified whisper. "He's in the ICU, Brenda. He's been there all this time." My mind spun, trying to grasp the impossible. Michael in the ICU? Alone? For 2 weeks? And Tiffany, his wife? Is she with him? Carol's face hardened, her neighborly concern replaced by a flash of raw disgust. "That one," she spat, the words dripping with venom. "The day after they took Michael away, I saw her loading 2 big suitcases into her car. I asked if she needed anything, if Michael was okay. She just smiled, a big fake smile, and said she was just taking a little much-needed getaway to Cancun to de-stress." She shook her head. "She's been posting pictures on Facebook, Brenda. Cocktails on the beach, shopping bags, all while that sweet boy is lying in a hospital bed by himself." The world tilted on its axis. My mission was no longer a surprise reunion, it was a rescue. I flagged down the taxi that had just started to pull away, my voice a command. "St. David's Medical Center, now, as fast as you can go."
The automatic doors of St. David's hissed open, and I was hit by a wall of frigid, sterile air that smelled of bleach and fear. It was the universal scent of hospitals, a place where life begins and ends with equal, impersonal efficiency. I marched to the main reception desk, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, my mind a blank slate of disciplined focus. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. "I need the room number for Michael Walsh," I said to the young woman behind the counter. My voice was steady, betraying none of the terror that was clawing at my insides. She typed his name into the computer, and a look of profound pity crossed her face. It was a look I'd seen 1,000 times on the faces of medics and chaplains. It was a look that meant bad news. "He's in the intensive care unit, ma'am. 5th floor, room 512. The waiting room is just off the elevator." The elevator ride was the longest of my life. The soft ding of each passing floor felt like a hammer blow against my heart. The 5th floor was quiet, hushed, the air thick with tension. A few other people were scattered in the waiting area, their faces pale and drawn, locked in their own private battles. I walked past them, my boots making no sound on the polished floor, my gaze fixed on the numbers on the wall. 508, 510, 512. The door was closed. A small, rectangular window was covered by a drawn curtain, hiding my son from me.
I raised my hand to knock, but it felt like a pointless courtesy. I pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. The room was a cacophony of quiet, rhythmic beeps and the soft sigh of a ventilator. And in the center of it all, in a bed that seemed far too large for him, was the ghost of my son. The strong, vibrant man who had run marathons and climbed mountains was gone. In his place was a fragile, emaciated figure, his skin a pale, waxy yellow, stretched painfully tight over his cheekbones. A web of tubes and wires snaked across his body, connecting him to a bank of humming, glowing machines that were doing the work his body no longer could. A man in a white coat, looking no older than Michael, turned from a monitor. His face was etched with exhaustion. "Can I help you?" "I'm his mother," I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "I'm Colonel Brenda Walsh. What has happened to my son?" The doctor's expression softened. "Colonel," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm Dr. Evans. Please have a seat." I remained standing. I couldn't make my legs move. "Mrs. Walsh," he began, getting straight to the point. "Michael was brought in with severe abdominal pain. After a series of tests, we discovered he has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It's very aggressive. It has spread to his liver and lymph nodes. By the time he arrived, it was already too advanced for surgery or chemotherapy to be effective." The clinical words slammed into me, each one a physical blow. Pancreatic cancer? Stage 4? Too advanced? "He's been unconscious for most of the past week," Dr. Evans continued softly. "We've had no visitors. We tried his wife's number, the emergency contact on file, dozens of times. For the last 10 days, it's gone straight to voicemail." As if summoned by my presence, Michael's eyelids began to flutter. Slowly, painfully, they opened. His eyes, clouded with medication, scanned the room before finding me. A flicker of light, of recognition in their depths. "Mom?" he rasped, his voice a dry, cracking whisper. I rushed to his bedside, my carefully constructed composure shattering into a million pieces. I grabbed his hand. It was shockingly cold. "I'm here, Michael," I sobbed, squeezing his fingers. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." A faint, ghostly smile touched his lips. "Knew you'd come. Wanted to call. Phone's gone." "Shh. Don't talk. Save your strength," I pleaded, my tears falling onto his hand. His gaze held mine, a sudden desperate clarity burning through the haze. "He love you, Mom," he whispered, the words barely a puff of air. Before I could answer, before I could scream back that I loved him more than life itself, the steady, rhythmic beep of the monitor beside his bed stopped. It was replaced by a single, high-pitched, unending tone that sliced through the room and through my heart. His hand went limp in mine. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. Dr. Evans moved with practiced urgency, hitting a button on the wall. "Code blue, room 512, code blue." Nurses flooded the room, a whirlwind of blue scrubs and grim faces. Someone gently but firmly pulled me away from the bed, guiding me out into the hallway as they swarmed around my son. I stood frozen, my palm pressed flat against the cool wall for support, listening to the frantic shouts, the rip of packaging, the terrible rhythmic thud of hands trying to restart a heart that had already given up. It was over. I knew it. I had come home too late. The minutes that followed were a blur of detached horror. Dr. Evans eventually emerged from the room, his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of professional regret. "Colonel Walsh, I'm so sorry. We did everything we could." The words were kind, but they were just noise. The only sound I could really hear was the echo of that flatline tone, a sound that would be seared into my memory forever. A compassionate nurse guided me through the necessary paperwork, her voice a soft, gentle murmur in the background of my roaring grief. They placed Michael's personal effects into a clear plastic bag, his worn leather wallet, the sports watch I gave him for his 30th birthday, his wedding band, and his phone, its screen ominously dark. The trip back to his house was made in a fog of disbelief. The taxi driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, his expression a mixture of pity and concern, but I couldn't have spoken if I'd tried. Stepping back into that silent, neglected house was a new kind of agony. It was no longer just a place of worry. It was now a tomb, a memorial to a life cut brutally short. The stale air seemed to mock me. The dust on the furniture seemed to whisper of abandonment. My grief was a physical weight, pressing down on me, threatening to crush me. But as I stood in the middle of the chaotic living room, another emotion began to rise through the sorrow, something sharp and cold and hard as steel. Rage. A righteous burning fury at the cancer that had stolen my son, at the universe for its cruel timing, but most of all at her, at Tiffany, the woman who had vowed to love and cherish him in sickness and in health, the woman who had left him to die alone while she sipped cocktails on a beach. That anger was a lifeline. It was a mission. I wouldn't let him just be a sad story. I would find out what happened here. I would get answers. I started in the kitchen, the heart of the home, now the epicenter of the neglect. The sour smell from the sink was overpowering. I forced myself to start cleaning, to bring order to the chaos. As I cleared away the molding takeout containers, my eyes landed on the precarious stack of mail on the counter. I began to sort through it with methodical precision, creating neat piles. Junk mail, bills, personal letters.
Most of the envelopes in the bill pile were marked past due or final notice in angry red letters. The mortgage, the electricity, the water. How had it gotten this bad? Michael was financially responsible to a fault. Then I found it. Tucked inside a thick catalog for a high-end furniture store was a separate, thinner folder. It wasn't with the other bills. It was hidden. My fingers, numb with grief just moments before, trembled as I opened it. Inside was a stack of credit card statements for a card that was in Michael's name, but one I didn't recognize. The statements were only for the last 3 months. I scanned the first page. Charge after charge at stores I knew Michael would never frequent. Gucci, Prada, Louis Vuitton, thousands of dollars. Then I turned the page and my blood ran cold. The charges were from the last 2 weeks. A single charge for $15,780 at the Sol Imar Luxury Resort Cancun, dated 12 days ago. A charge for $25,200 at Cartier Dallas, dated 10 days ago. A charge for $7,500 at a place called Oceanfront Yacht Charters, dated 8 days ago. I sank into a dusty kitchen chair, the papers shaking in my hand. The dates, they lined up perfectly with the time he had been in the ICU. While my son was fighting for his last breaths, hooked up to a tangle of machines, his wife had been on a monstrous, ghoulish shopping spree, burning through his money like it was fire sale. This wasn't just a vacation, this was a systematic looting, a final, depraved act of betrayal. And as I stared at the cold, hard proof, I knew that this was only the tip of a very dark and very ugly iceberg. My grief was a storm, but my anger was a lighthouse, cutting through the fog and giving me a direction. I knew I couldn't do this alone. Fighting a conventional war was one thing. This was a different kind of battlefield, one with rules I didn't understand. I needed an expert. I needed someone who knew the enemy's tactics. I pulled out my old, battered satellite phone, the one I kept in my go bag, with a list of contacts I trusted with my life. My finger scrolled past names of generals and intelligence officers until it landed on one that wasn't a military title. David Chen. The name brought back a flood of memories. The dust and chaos of Off-Bull, the sharp crack of enemy fire, the smell of cordite in the air.
David had been an FBI agent then, a specialist in tracking the intricate web of terrorist financing. He had been embedded with a unit that got pinned down in a marketplace ambush. My Marine Expeditionary Unit had been the quick reaction force. We'd gone in hard and fast and pulled him and his team out of the fire. He was a quiet, intense man who didn't say much, but after he'd gripped my hand and said, "Colonel, I owe you my life. If you ever need anything at all, you call." I had brushed it off at the time. We're just doing our job. I never imagined I would one day be calling in that marker. I knew he'd left the bureau and started a private intelligence and security firm in Austin. A long shot, but it was the only one I had. I dialed his number, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm. He answered on the second ring, his voice crisp and professional. "Chen." "David," I said, my own voice tight, strained. "It's Brenda Walsh, Colonel Walsh, from Off Gull." There was a beat of silence. Not of confusion, but of instant, sharp-edged recognition. "Colonel," he said, and the professionalism in his voice was replaced with a genuine warmth. "Of course, I'd know that voice anywhere. It's been over a decade. Are you all right? You sound—" He trailed off, letting me fill in the blank. The carefully constructed walls of my military composure began to crack. The story spilled out of me, not the clean, strategic summary I had planned, but a messy, grief-stricken torrent. I told him about the surprise, the house, the hospital, Michael's death. I told him about Tiffany in Cancun and the sickening discovery of the credit card receipts. I was rambling, I knew it, but I couldn't stop. When I finally finished, the line was quiet for a long moment. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was the calm, focused silence of a brilliant mind processing a threat, analyzing enemy movements. "Brenda," he finally said, and his voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced with the cold, hard steel of the federal agent he used to be. "I am so deeply sorry for your son. What you are describing is beyond monstrous." He paused. "Send me clear photographs of every single document you have found. The receipts, the overdue bills, all of it. Do not, and I mean do not, make any contact with her. Don't answer her calls. Don't reply to her texts. You are now in a hostile environment, and you need to treat her as an active threat." His words, as harsh as they were strangely comforting. He was speaking my language. "This kind of behavior," he continued, his voice low and serious, "this isn't just a case of a bad wife. This is a pattern. This is predatory. These people, they have a playbook." A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning snaked down my spine. What did he mean, these people? What kind of playbook? Was my son's death not just a tragedy, but a tactic in a game I didn't even know was being played? The next morning, I was in the middle of methodically photographing a stack of overdue utility bills when my phone buzzed with an unknown Austin number. Wary, but knowing I needed to gather all the intelligence I could, I answered, keeping my voice a flat, neutral monotone. "Hello, may I speak with a representative of Michael Walsh's estate?" "You're speaking with his mother, Brenda Walsh. Who is this?" "Ma'am, my name is Robert Davies. I was Michael's senior partner at the architecture firm. On behalf of everyone at Davies and Associates, please accept our deepest, most sincere condolences. Michael he was the best we had, a true talent and a wonderful man." "Thank you, Mr. Davies," I said, a lump forming in my throat. "It's kind of you to call." "Of course," he said, then hesitated. "Ma'am, that's not the only reason for my call. I'm in a bit of an awkward position here, and I wasn't sure who else to contact." He took a deep breath. "Michael's wife, Tiffany, called my office not 20 minutes ago. She was quite insistent." A cold premonition washed over me. "Insistent about what, Mr. Davies?" She was demanding that we wire her an advance on Michael's final paycheck and any accrued vacation pay, a rather large sum. She claimed she needed it immediately to cover some unforeseen medical expenses related to his care. The phone felt heavy in my hand, a dead weight. The sheer, unadulterated nerve of the woman was almost incomprehensible. My son was dead. He had been dead for less than 2 days, and this vulture was already trying to peck the last remaining flesh from his bones, using the very medical crisis she had ignored as a tool to pry loose more money. The rage that filled me was so pure and white-hot it burned away the tears. It was the kind of rage that fueled a counteroffensive.
I kept my voice ice cold and steady. It was the voice I used to give orders that could not be questioned. Mr. Davies, I am Colonel Brenda Walsh, and I am the executor of my son's estate and the holder of his durable power of attorney. You will not, under any circumstances, release any funds, information, or assets to Tiffany. Is that understood? Yes, Colonel, he stammered, taken aback by my tone. My son's medical expenses have been handled, I continued, the words like chips of ice. As for his wife, Tiffany, she is currently vacationing at a luxury resort in Cancun and is therefore in no position to be managing his affairs. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Cancun? He finally managed to say, his voice a mixture of shock and disgust. My God, she told me she had been sitting by his bedside around the clock. She is a liar, I said flatly. I will be in touch with your Human Resources Department shortly with the necessary legal documentation. Until you hear from me or my attorney, you will not engage with her further. Do I make myself clear? Crystal clear, Colonel. I am so sorry. I hung up the phone, my knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. She wasn't just a thief who had capitalized on a tragedy. She was an active, ongoing threat, a parasite still trying to feed on its host even after he was gone. This wasn't just about getting justice for what she did. This was about stopping what she was still trying to do. I have to ask you all, what would you have done in that moment? What would have been your very next move? Let me know in the comments. I truly want to know. I immediately relayed the details of Mr. Davies' call to David. A text came back almost instantly. Perfect. This is exactly what we needed. It establishes her intent to defraud the estate after his death. It's a crucial piece of the puzzle. Now, find me that power of attorney. It's our key. The search for the POA was a frantic, grief-fueled mission. I tore through Michael's meticulously organized office, sifting through file cabinets and desk drawers. Nothing. It wasn't with his will or his tax documents or his birth certificate. For a terrifying hour, I thought it didn't exist, that my one piece of legal leverage was a phantom. Desperate, I moved to his bedroom closet, digging through boxes of things he hadn't unpacked since college. And there, at the bottom of a box filled with old yearbooks and faded concert t-shirts, I found it. It was tucked inside his favorite book from childhood, Where the Wild Things Are. It was a place only he and I would have understood. A place of safety and memory. A place Tiffany would never have looked. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. It was an ironclad, durable power of attorney, properly notarized and dated just before my last deployment. He had been looking out for me. Even then. I sent a clear photo of the first and last pages to David. His response was a single powerful word: weapon. He called me a moment later, his voice charged with strategic energy. Brenda, listen carefully. This is our moment to strike. With that POA, combined with the evidence of financial exploitation, the resort bills, the jewelry, and now the call to his employer, we can petition the bank directly for an emergency asset freeze. We won't even wait for the courts. Can we do that? I asked, hope flickering within me. It's an aggressive move, he admitted. Normally, they'd demand a court order, but I've already made a call to a contact I have, a senior vice president in the global fraud division at their headquarters.
a man who owes me a significant favor from an old insider trading case. I've given him a heads up. He's expecting your email. We're going to allege exploitation of a vulnerable adult resulting in material loss to the estate. His terminal diagnosis makes him vulnerable under the statute. We're going to frame this as an active, ongoing crime. He walked me through the exact wording, the precise legal jargon that would trigger their internal protocols and bypass the usual red tape. He was giving me the coordinates for a precision strike. Remember, he said, his voice firm, when you write this, you are not a grieving mother. You are not asking for a favor. You are Colonel Brenda Walsh, the legal representative of the estate, reporting a federal crime and demanding immediate action to protect the remaining assets. You are there to command the situation. Understood, I said, the familiar word a comfort. I sat at Michael's desk, the POA lying beside the keyboard. The grief was still a heavy cloak around my shoulders, but now it felt like a warrior's cloak. I was no longer just a mother mourning her son. I was a Marine embarking on her most important mission, and my target was directly in my crosshairs. I followed David's instructions to the letter. The email was a masterpiece of cold legal precision. I attached the scanned POA, a digital copy of Michael's death certificate from the funeral home, and the two most outrageous receipts, the resort and the Cartier boutique. The subject line was designed to set off alarm bells in any corporate legal department. Urgent, official notification of financial exploitation and demand for emergency asset freeze pursuant to POA, estate of Michael Walsh. I hovered my finger over the send button. It felt like pushing the button on a detonator. I took a deep breath and clicked. The email vanished into the ether. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait. The silence in the house was deafening. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator seemed magnified. 1 hour passed, then another. I paced the dusty living room, my phone clutched in my hand. Maybe it hadn't worked. Maybe the bank's bureaucracy was too thick even for David's contact. And then, at the 2-hour mark, my phone screamed to life. A screen lit up with her name, glowing like a toxic warning. Tiffany. I let it ring once, twice, a small, cold smile touching my lips for the first time in days. I took a steadying breath, tapped the screen, and put the call on speakerphone. The sound that erupted from my phone was not a human voice. It was a shriek, a raw, animalistic sound of pure, unadulterated fury. "Brenda, what in the hell did you do?" "I have no idea what you're talking about, Tiffany," I said, my voice as calm and flat as a frozen lake. "You don't play dumb with me, you old hag," she screamed. The sound of clinking glasses and faint music had been replaced by a chaotic cacophony. I could hear her yelling at someone in the background. "My card was just declined, at the hotel bar, in front of everyone. The manager just escorted me from the pool and told me my account has a security hold. This has your name written all over it. What did you do?" "What needed to be done," I said simply. "I'm protecting my son's assets. Michael is gone, Tiffany."
There was a hiss of air through her teeth. "Oh, right, that," she said, her voice dropping the frantic act and becoming something far more chilling, cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Look, this is very sad, and I'm very upset. But I am stuck in a foreign country. I need you to call the bank and undo whatever you did so I can book a flight home. It's the least you can do." The sheer audacity, the complete lack of remorse. It was breathtaking. "No," I said quietly. "The party's over, Tiffany. You're on your own." And with a satisfying click, I ended the call. It immediately rang again. I ignored it. A voicemail notification popped up, then another, and another. 5 in total. The first was a string of curses so vile they would have made a drill sergeant blush. The second was a series of frantic threats about her high-powered lawyers. The third was a tearful, pathetic attempt at manipulation, sobbing about how scared and alone she was. I listened to each one, saving them as evidence.
Each message was another thread in the web she was weaving around herself. But what I would find later, on my son's phone, was infinitely more damning than any hysterical voicemail she could ever leave. After Tiffany's frantic calls subsided, an eerie quiet descended upon the house once more. My victory felt temporary, a single skirmish in a much larger war. I knew I needed more firepower, more intelligence. My gaze fell on Michael's phone, still plugged into the charger on the kitchen counter. I had been avoiding it, avoiding the digital ghost of my son. But now it was a vital piece of battlefield terrain that needed to be secured. I sat at the kitchen table and unlocked the screen. The background was a photo of him and me on a hiking trip in Big Bend National Park a few years ago, both of us grinning, sunburned, and happy. A wave of grief, so powerful it almost buckled me over, washed through me. I pushed it down. Compartmentalize, Walsh. The mission comes first. I started with his text messages. The thread with Tiffany was almost pristine, scrubbed clean except for a few mundane messages about groceries from months ago. She had covered her tracks, but she wasn't as smart as she thought she was. I checked his email, his photo gallery, and then my eyes landed on an app I hadn't noticed before. It was a simple, pre-installed voice memo app. Michael had never been one for writing in a journal, but he often dictated notes for his architectural designs. Curious, I tapped it open. There were dozens of files, most of them labeled with things like blueprint ideas for the Miller Project or notes on city zoning codes. But near the bottom of the list were 3 files with very different titles. For Mom 1, for Mom 2, and for Mom 3. The last one was dated just 3 weeks ago. My hand was shaking so violently I could barely press the play button. Michael's voice, thin and fragile, filled the silence. It was broken by a dry, rattling cough that tore at my heart. Test. Okay, it's working. Mom, if you're hearing this, it means the worst has happened. It means you're here, and I'm not. I'm so sorry. I should have told you how sick I was. I was a coward. I didn't want to be a burden during your last tour. Tears streamed down my cheeks, blurring the screen in front of me. But that's not why I'm recording this, he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, terrified whisper. Mom, it's Tiffany. Something is wrong with her. Terribly wrong. I think she's been trying to hurt me. He took a ragged breath. It started small. She would forget to bring me my pain medication for hours. I thought she was just stressed, but then the pain got worse even when she did bring the pills. I was so out of it, so weak, but last week I managed to get out of bed while she was in the shower. I checked the bottle of oxycodone the doctor gave me. The pills inside, Mom, they weren't the right ones. I looked them up online. They were extra-strength Tylenol. A strangled sob escaped my lips. She had swapped them. She had left him to suffer in agony. I confronted her, he whispered, his voice cracking. She just laughed. She told me I was being dramatic, that the cancer was making me paranoid. She made me feel like I was crazy, but I know what I saw. She watches me when she thinks I'm asleep. She looks at me like I'm not a person, like I'm just an obstacle. An account balance. I started recording everything I could. I saved all the receipts for the things she bought and hid them in the safe. It's in the office. The combination is Dad's birthday, the year he was born. He was openly weeping now. This sounds raw and heartbreaking. I'm so scared, Mom, and I'm so sorry I wasn't stronger than her. The recording ended there. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than I had ever experienced. This wasn't just neglect. This wasn't just theft. This was a slow, deliberate, and monstrously cruel form of torture. I stumbled from the kitchen, my legs unsteady, my entire being consumed by a single terrifying thought. She hadn't just let my son die. She had helped him along. The combination to the safe was burned into my memory. 0810-1955. John's birthday. A date that had once been a celebration now felt like a secret key to a chamber of horrors. I found the small black safe hidden behind a loose panel in the back of Michael's office closet, just as he had said. My fingers, slick with cold sweat, carefully turned the dial. Left, right, left. The heavy steel door clicked open with a soft thud. Inside was a large manila folder bulging with papers. It was his entire case against her. Credit card statements he'd printed with her extravagant purchases circled in a shaky red pen. Notes he'd scribbled about her behavior, her coldness, the dates she'd forgotten his medication. It was the meticulous work of a man fighting for his life in secret. And at the very bottom of the stack, I found a flimsy pink carbon copy slip. It was from a pawn shop called Sal's Buy and Sell, dated just 1 week before Michael died. The item description made my vision go red. Gents gold Rolex watch, Submariner model. The breath left my body in a pained rush. It was John's watch, the one he'd worn through 2 tours in Vietnam, the one that I had carefully kept for years before giving it to Michael on his 30th birthday, telling him to wear it in health and happiness and to one day pass it on to his own son. It was more than a watch. It was a legacy. And that monster, that soulless ghoul, had ripped it off his dying wrist and sold it for pocket money. Reason and strategy evaporated, replaced by a primal, maternal rage. I didn't call David. I didn't call the police. I grabbed my keys, the pawn slip, and the original certificate of authenticity I knew Michael kept with his important papers. I was going to get that watch back.
Sal's Buy and Sell was exactly the kind of place you'd imagine. Tucked away in a grimy strip mall, its windows were barred, and a faded neon sign flickered pathetically in the afternoon sun. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of dust and desperation. A large, greasy man with dead eyes and a stained t-shirt stood behind a counter of yellowed, bulletproof glass. This had to be Sal. "I am here to retrieve stolen property," I announced, my voice echoing in the silent shop. I slid the pink slip and the authenticity certificate under the grimy tray. He barely glanced at them. A slow, mocking smile spread across his face. "Stolen? Lady, this was a legit transaction. Your friend, Tiffany, sold it to me fair and square. The police hold is over. It's mine to sell now." He gestured to a dusty display case, and there it was, sitting on a grimy piece of velvet next to a gaudy collection of rings. "That watch belonged to my late husband and my recently deceased son," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low. "It is a priceless family heirloom. You are in possession of stolen goods, and I am here to reclaim it." He let out a short, ugly laugh. "Yeah? Well, life's tough. You want it, you gotta buy it back for double what I paid. I am not leaving this store without my son's watch." His smile vanished. With a loud buzz, he unlocked the door to his cage and lumbered out, his sheer bulk seeming to suck the air out of the room. He was trying to intimidate me, to use his size to scare me off. He got right in my face, his breath a foul mix of garlic and cheap cigars. "Listen to me, you old broad. I don't know who you think you are, but you're in my world now. Tiffany, she's a business associate, and you are trespassing. I suggest you turn around and walk out that door before you get hurt." For a fleeting second, I felt a jolt of raw physical fear. I was a 62-year-old woman, alone, facing down a criminal in his own den. But then, 40 years of instinct, of discipline, of facing down men far more dangerous than this pathetic lowlife kicked in. I didn't back down. I didn't even flinch. I drew myself up to my full 5'7" height, met his gaze without blinking, and let the Colonel take over. "My name is Colonel Brenda Walsh, United States Marine Corps, retired, and you are an accomplice to a felony. You are threatening a commissioned officer.
You are making a series of very, very poor tactical decisions. Now step aside and give me my property." He was so taken aback by my defiance that he actually took a step back. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. He had expected tears, pleading. He had not expected a fight. As we stood in that tense, silent standoff, I heard the jingle of the bell over the shop's front door. What happened in the next 10 seconds would change the entire course of my war. "Sal, still running this fine, upstanding establishment, I see?" The voice that cut through the tense silence was deceptively calm, almost conversational, but it held an undercurrent of authority that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Sal spun around. His face, which had been contorted in a mask of thuggish rage, went slack with a look of pure, unadulterated panic. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun, was David Chen, and flanking him were two large, grim-faced men in unassuming suits that radiated the unmistakable aura of law enforcement. "Chen?" Sal choked out, his voice a strangled squeak. "What the hell are you doing here?" "I'm clean." "Are you, Sal?" David said, stepping into the shop, his eyes doing a slow, methodical sweep of the premises before landing on me. "Brenda, I told you not to go anywhere alone." His voice was scolding, but his eyes were filled with relief. He then turned his attention back to Sal, who was now sweating profusely. "Funny thing," David continued, his tone light but his eyes hard as flint. "We've been monitoring your activities for a while now. A lot of high-end stolen goods have been passing through this little shop of yours. When Colonel Walsh called my name and mentioned your name, it was like an early Christmas." David nodded to one of his companions, who walked calmly over to the display case. "That Rolex," he said, pointing, "we'll be taking that as evidence. It was reported stolen by its legal owner. Right here." He gestured to me. The whole operation was a blur of quiet, ruthless efficiency. While one detective read Sal his rights and cuffed him, the other started documenting the shop's inventory. It was clear this was more than just a visit. It was a full-blown raid they had been planning for weeks. My desperate mission had inadvertently sprung their trap. David explained later that after my call, he had put a tracker on my car. He'd known Tiffany was bad news and suspected she might lead to something bigger. He hadn't expected me to walk right into the lion's den myself. The lead detective carefully placed John's Rolex into an evidence bag, but before sealing it, he paused and looked at me. "Colonel," he said, his voice respectful, "given the extreme circumstances, the DA has authorized the immediate release of this item into your custody once it's processed. It's the least we can do." As I walked out of that grimy pawn shop and back into the clean Texas air, the familiar weight of the watch in my palm was a small, solid victory in a world of chaos. David stood with me on the sidewalk as they loaded a sputtering, cursing Sal into the back of an unmarked car. "His ledgers were a gold mine," David said, his face grim. "We found Tiffany's name all over them. She's been systematically selling off Michael's assets to this guy for the better part of a year, piece by piece. This isn't just a domestic dispute anymore, Brenda. You've stumbled into the middle of a major criminal enterprise." The watch felt heavy in my hand, a tangible link to my husband and my son. I had come for a piece of my family's past, but instead I had found the key to its future justice. This was no longer just my fight, and we were going to need a very good lawyer.
Then he looked at me. "Colonel Walsh," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "In my 20 years as a prosecutor, I've put away some real monsters. But this is a special kind of evil." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "We are not just going to file for control of the estate. We are going to file a civil suit for wrongful death, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We are going to take everything from her. We are going to bury her under a mountain of litigation so high she'll never see the sun again."
The emergency hearing a week later felt like preparing for D-Day. Frank and his team were a whirlwind of efficiency, filing motions, subpoenaing records, and preparing me for my testimony. I insisted on wearing my full service uniform, complete with all my decorations. It wasn't a costume, it was armor. It was a statement to the court and to her of who I was and what I represented. Tiffany arrived with a high-priced, slick-looking lawyer who immediately went on the offensive. He portrayed me as a cold, absentee military mother who had been estranged from her son for years, now swooping in like a vulture to steal the inheritance from his poor, grieving widow. Tiffany played her part perfectly, dressed in a simple but obviously expensive black dress, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek as her lawyer spoke. She looked fragile, heartbroken, and utterly believable. For a moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in the judge's eyes. Judge Albright was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, known for her sharp legal mind and her intolerance for courtroom theatrics. My heart pounded. What if she believed them? "Your Honor," Frank said, his voice calm and steady as he rose. "The petitioner's grief is indeed profound, but her grief is for her son, not for his money." He then turned to Tiffany's lawyer. "You speak of a grieving widow. We would like to present evidence of the nature of that grief." And then he played the recording for the court. The transformation in the courtroom was instantaneous. The board chatter stopped, the air grew thick and heavy. As Michael's ghostly, terrified whisper filled the room, describing the stolen medication and his wife's cruelty, a wave of shock and disgust washed over the spectators. I kept my eyes fixed on Tiffany. Her mask of sorrow didn't just crack, it shattered. Her face contorted into a snarl of pure, undisguised hatred, her eyes boring into me like daggers. She knew, in that moment, that the game was up. The ghost of my son had just testified against his own murderer from beyond the grave. I just want to pause and say thank you for sticking with me this far. This is hard to tell. If you're still here, please comment with the number 1 so I know you're on this journey with me. It means more than you know. Judge Albright's face was like granite as the recording ended. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, broken only by a single choked sob from someone in the gallery. She looked from the phone in Frank's hand to Tiffany's rage-filled face and then to me, her eyes lingering for a moment on the gold star pinned to my uniform. Based on the profoundly disturbing evidence presented here today, she announced, her voice ringing with cold fury. This court finds that there is significant cause to believe the respondent, Mrs. Tiffany Walsh, has acted in a manner detrimental to the well-being and the estate of the deceased. Therefore, I am granting an immediate and total temporary injunction. The gavel struck the wood with a sound like a rifle shot. All assets of the estate of Michael Walsh are to be frozen, effective immediately. Sole control and administration of said estate is hereby granted to the petitioner, Colonel Brenda Walsh, pending a full probate hearing. Mrs. Walsh, you are ordered to vacate the marital property within 24 hours and to have no further contact with the petitioner. Tiffany lunged to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "She can't do this!" she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly thing. "He was my husband! That money is mine!" "Control yourself, madam," Judge Albright warned, her eyes narrowing, "or I will have the bailiff escort you to a holding cell to contemplate the meaning of contempt of court." Tiffany's lawyer grabbed her arm, whispering frantically in her ear, but she shook him off. Her eyes burning with a venomous, cornered animal hatred, found mine. "You will regret this, you old witch," she hissed across the courtroom. "This isn't over." Frank put a steadying hand on my arm. "Let's go, Colonel. Now, we've won." But as we walked out of the courthouse, I didn't feel victorious. I felt a deep, chilling sense of foreboding. He was right. We had won the battle. But her parting words echoed in my mind. This wasn't over. A woman like that, a woman with nothing left to lose, was at her most dangerous. My fears were realized less than an hour later. When Frank and I pulled up to Michael's house to arrange for a locksmith, we found the front door hanging off its hinges, a gaping wound in the cheerful blue paint. It had been kicked in with savage force. "Call 911, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, as I got out of the car. I pushed the broken door open and stepped inside. The scene that greeted me was one of pure nihilistic rage. She had come back not to pack, but to destroy. The living room was a war zone. The sofa cushions were slashed to ribbons, goose feathers drifting through the air like morbid snow. Drawers had been pulled out and their contents dumped on the floor. Every picture frame, every piece of glass had been smashed. She had stolen the few remaining items of value, the television, a sound system, but her real goal hadn't been theft. It had been desecration. She had targeted the things that were personal, the things that were irreplaceable. Michael's college diploma was ripped to shreds. The delicate architectural model that had won him a prestigious award was crushed into a pile of splintered balsa wood. And then I saw the wall. On the largest wall of the living room, the one where our family photos used to hang, she had used a can of black spray paint to scrawl a final, hateful message. "He was mine to ruin, not yours." Standing there amidst the ruins of my son's life, a life that she had so callously helped to end, I felt the last vestiges of my grief burn away, leaving behind something cold, hard, and unbreakable. She had declared war, and she had made the fatal mistake of reminding me that I was a Marine. The police came, their faces grim as they documented the vandalism and violation of the court order. A warrant was issued for Tiffany's arrest, but she had vanished. She had checked out of her hotel, and her phone was turned off. She was in the wind. The days that followed were a blur of cleaning up the wreckage, both physically and emotionally. Frank assured me that her running was an admission of guilt, that it would only strengthen our case. David used his contacts to put out an alert, flagging her name at airports and border crossings. But I knew we needed more. We needed to find her, and we needed a confession that would put her away for good. The voice memo was powerful, but her lawyers could argue Michael was drugged, confused. We needed her own words, clear and undeniable.
A week later, just as I was starting to lose hope, I got a call from an unknown number. "Brenda? It's me." Her voice was soft, tearful, completely different from the screeching banshee in the courtroom. It was Tiffany. My blood ran cold. "How did you get this number?" I asked, my voice flat. "That doesn't matter," she said, a pathetic sob in her voice. "Listen, I know I messed up. I was angry, and I was grieving, and I did a terrible thing. I am so, so sorry about the house. I want to make it right. Please, can we just meet? No lawyers, just you and me. I want to explain everything." It was a trap. I knew it. She thought she could manipulate me, play on my sympathies. But what she didn't know was that I was setting a trap of my own. I immediately texted David and Frank. Within an hour, a plan was in motion. "Meet me at the house tomorrow at noon," I told her when she called back. "We can talk then." The next morning, 2 plainclothes detectives arrived. They were experts in surveillance. They fitted me with a tiny, nearly invisible microphone and set up audio and video recording equipment throughout the living room, hidden in smoke detectors and light fixtures. "Let her talk," the lead detective, a woman named Diaz, advised me. "Act vulnerable, grieving, overwhelmed. People like her can't resist the chance to feel superior. She'll get arrogant. She'll brag. Just keep her talking." At noon exactly, Tiffany knocked on the door. She looked haggard, her expensive clothes wrinkled. She was a fugitive, and it showed. She had a bouquet of cheap, grocery store flowers in her hand. "A peace offering," she said, trying for a sad smile.
I played my part. I let her in, my shoulders slumped, my eyes red. I made us tea. We sat on the new, rented furniture, the smell of fresh paint still lingering in the air. "I know you think I'm a monster," she began, her voice trembling, "but I loved Michael. I really did. The money, he was so generous. He wanted me to be happy. All those things I bought, it was what he would have wanted. He was in so much pain at the end. The doctors gave him such strong medication, but it never seemed to work. I don't understand it." I looked at her, my eyes pleading. "I just wish I knew he was comfortable in his final days." I had cast the line. Now I waited to see if the shark would bite. Her mask of sympathy flickered, just for a second. A look of annoyance, of impatience, crossed her face before she smoothed it away. She leaned forward, placing her hand on my knee in a gesture of fake intimacy. "Brenda, you need to understand," she said, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper. "Michael was very dramatic. A bit of a whiner. You know, always complaining about the pain. He was dying anyway. Honestly, what's a little more discomfort in the grand scheme of things?" She shrugged, a tiny dismissive gesture. "Besides, that prescription oxycodone is ridiculously expensive. I had much better, more important things to spend that money on." He wouldn't have understood. Her words hung in the air, cold and sharp, and utterly monstrous. She had no idea she had just spoken them to a live microphone, broadcasting her confession directed to the police. She had no idea she had just confessed not just to theft, but to a level of cruelty that defied human understanding. Her arrogance had been her downfall. The trap had snapped shut. The moment those words left Tiffany's mouth, the game was over. I saw a flicker of movement in the hallway out of the corner of my eye. Detective Diaz gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Better things to spend the money on?" I repeated, letting the fake vulnerability drop from my voice, replaced by the cold, hard steel of a Marine colonel. "Like a diamond bracelet? Like a yacht in Cancun?" She recoiled as if she'd been slapped. The color drained from her face as she realized her mistake. I didn't mean it like that," she stammered, her eyes darting towards the door. "Oh, I think you meant it exactly like that," I said, standing up. At that moment, 2 uniformed officers stepped into the room from the back hallway, Detective Diaz right behind them. Tiffany's face, a mask of arrogant manipulation just moments before, crumbled into raw, primal fear. "Tiffany Walsh," Diaz said, her voice ringing with authority, "you are under arrest for fraud, grand larceny, and felony exploitation of a vulnerable adult." She didn't scream, she didn't fight. She just crumpled. All the venom and bluster gone, leaving behind something small, pathetic, and utterly defeated. As they led her away in handcuffs, her eyes met mine one last time. They weren't filled with hate anymore. They were filled with the shocking emptiness of a predator who has finally been caged. The legal fallout was swift and brutal. Faced with the undeniable video and audio confession, on top of the mountain of financial evidence and the testimony from Saul the pawnbroker, Tiffany's case was unwinnable. The investigation had also uncovered the families of her 2 prior husbands, both of whom had died under suspicious circumstances after she had systematically drained their finances. The district attorney, seeing a chance to dismantle a much larger criminal ring, offered her a deal: testify against her co-conspirators in exchange for pleading guilty to the charges in Michael's case. She took it. The final sentence was 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for at least 20. Justice had been served. The monster was gone. But my son was still gone, and the victory felt ashen in my mouth. There was no celebration, only a vast, quiet emptiness. The funeral was held on a gray, overcast Tuesday. I had expected only a handful of people, but the small chapel was standing room only. His colleagues from the firm were there,
telling stories of his brilliance and his kindness. His neighbors like Carol were there, speaking of his warm smile and his willingness to always lend a hand. And then a group of about a dozen teenagers, all dressed awkwardly in their Sunday best, filed in and sat together in the front pews. I had no idea who they were. After the service, as people milled about offering quiet condolences, a tall, serious-looking young man from the group approached me, clutching a rolled-up set of blueprints. "Colonel Walsh," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "I'm Leo. We're so sorry for your loss. Mr. Walsh, he was our mentor." He unfurled the blueprints on a nearby table. "They were for a community youth center. He was teaching us," a young girl next to him explained, tears streaming down her face. "He came every Tuesday and Thursday after work. He taught us how to design, how to dream. He was helping us prepare this proposal to submit to the city." Leo looked up at me, his eyes filled with wisdom far beyond his years. "He didn't just teach us about buildings, ma'am. He taught us how to build a future. He was the first adult who really ever believed in us."
Listening to these kids, these bright, hopeful souls that my son had quietly nurtured, I finally understood. Tiffany had taken his money, she had taken his peace, she had even taken his life. But she could never, ever touch his legacy. His true legacy wasn't in a bank account. It was standing right here in front of me, in the hearts and minds of these children. And in that moment of profound, heartbreaking clarity, I found my new mission. The weeks following the funeral were filled not with the emptiness I had feared, but with purpose. I learned that the mentorship program, which Michael had been funding out of his own pocket, was on the verge of collapse. It was operating out of a cramped, leaking room in the back of a church, and they were about to lose their lease. This was unacceptable. This was a legacy that would not be allowed to die. I met with Frank Miller. We liquidated the assets Tiffany hadn't managed to steal, the house, the stocks, the savings. It was a substantial sum. With it, we established the Michael Walsh Foundation for Future Architects, a nonprofit with a single clear mission: to provide underprivileged kids with the tools and mentorship they needed to build their dreams. Our first order of business was to give the program a permanent home. We bought an old, abandoned warehouse in a neglected part of town, and using a preliminary design Michael himself had sketched out, we began to transform it. The work was hard, all-consuming. It was a new kind of war, a war against despair, a battle to build something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. I was on the construction site every day, channeling my grief into logistics, into managing contractors, into fighting for permits. For the first time since Michael's death, I felt like I was breathing again. It was during this time that I got to know Leo, the quiet, brilliant boy who had first approached me. He became my shadow at the construction site, his eyes soaking up every detail, his questions sharp and insightful. He had a gift, a natural talent that was undeniable. He also had a secret. He was fighting a battle of his own against a chronic kidney disease that often left him exhausted and in pain. He was a ward of the state, bouncing between foster homes, his future as uncertain as his health. He had no one. One hot afternoon, as we were looking over the final blueprints, he turned to me, his young face serious. "Mr. Walsh would be really proud of this," he said quietly. "He would be proud of you." In that moment, something shifted inside me. I looked at this incredible, resilient boy who had faced more hardship in his 15 years than most people do in a lifetime. And I saw the same fire, the same quiet strength, the same gentle soul that had lived in my own son. My life had been defined by loss, the loss of my husband, the loss of my son. I had thought my time as a mother was over, but I was wrong. It wasn't about replacing Michael. It was about honoring him, about paying forward the love he had given to the world. The next day, I called Frank Miller. "Frank," I said, my voice clear and steady, "I need you to file some new paperwork for me. I want to know what it takes to adopt a 15-year-old boy."
Today, 6 years later, the Michael Walsh Center for Future Architect is one of the most successful programs of its kind in the state. And my son, Leo Walsh, just graduated magna cum laude from the University of Texas School of Architecture. He is healthy, he is brilliant, and he is the light of my life. The grief from Michael is a part of my landscape now, a valley I carry with me always. But it is not a desolate place. It is a place where new things have learned to grow. It is a constant reminder that even in the face of the most profound loss, we have a choice. We can be consumed by the darkness, or we can choose to build a legacy of light. Life will knock you down. It will test you in ways you cannot imagine. But it is how we rise, how we fight back, and what we choose to build in the name of those we have lost that truly defines us. What would you have done in my shoes? Have you ever had to fight for a loved one's legacy? Share your story in the comments below, and if you found strength in this story, please give this video a like and subscribe for more.